The 552nd edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Gus. Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Friday afternoon. A bit of surprising news for Carolina as they added a transfer, but it's not the one we talked about on the last edition of the show. Instead, they added a transfer from Virginia Tech. Another guard, another backcourt player has been added to the roster for next season. And we're here to talk about him and what expectations, what his role could mean for Carolina, what it means for their interest in pursuit of Andre Stoyakovich as well. Then we got to address some negativity that's been coming Carolina's way from the national media about the job or the lack thereof that Hubert Davis has done this offseason in the transfer portal as well. Before we do any of that, though, we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to Julius Irving, Dr. J, for today's pod thought, and that thought is, quote, goals determine what you're going to be, end quote. You go back to the last time we heard from Hubert Davis, which would technically be on his radio show the Monday after the loss to Ole Miss. Jones Angell asked him, what are your objectives for this offseason as you look to rebuild, retool your roster for next year? And he said he wanted to add size and he wanted to add shooting. And when you've looked at every single one of Carolina's transfer portal commitments, they've either met both of the criteria or at least one. And so what I think, what the goal is trying to be for next year is a team that's much more bigger. I think when you get beat by Duke 3 times, and a big reason why was because you could not deal with their size and their length, that forces your hand. And then after you put one of the, the worst shooting together, one of the worst shooting seasons together in program history, there was going to be a need to add shooting to the roster. So that was the goal for Carolina, to become a bigger team and a much more better shooting team next season. And I think when you look at the latest transfer that Carolina has added, he fits one of the criteria, but not so much the other. And we're talking about Virginia Tech transfer Jaydon Young, who committed to Carolina this afternoon, kind of out of nowhere. Kind of like Kyan Evans, where it popped up, kind of out of the blue. The thing with the Evans commitment was we knew about an hour and a half, 2 hours, he was coming, and Carolina was landing his commitment. That was not the same with this. I mean, when I tell you it came out of nowhere, it literally came out of nowhere, and a big reason why was he'd already committed to High Point upon entering the transfer portal. High Point's coach leaves, going to be an assistant at Creighton before taking over that job in the years to come. probably opened up the door for Carolina to get involved. And you're talking about a player that's played 58 career games with 10 starts. This past season, he averaged 8.1 points per game, 1.7 rebounds, 1.4 assists, shot 35% from the field, 30% from three. For his career, a 5.3 point per game score with 1.3 rebounds, 1.1 assists, shooting 35% and 31% from behind the 3-point line. Not a lot of shooting on his resume when you look at his box score, but at 6'4", if he can play primarily in the backcourt, Carolina has added size once again to that position. When you look at the fifth transfer portal commitment from Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner, and the staff, what do you make of this one when you consider it came out of nowhere? And while he has ACC starting experience, scored 27 points in a win against Miami earlier this year, his shooting numbers, well, they leave a lot to be desired.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the sexiest pickup that you could get. You look at him, and really he had two different seasons. He had the first half of this year, or not even the first half, really the first 26 games of the season, where, he shot the ball at a 32% clip, 30% from beyond the arc, and averaged just 6.2 points per game. Then you get to the second half of the season where he goes in and pretty much just takes over. And, you go back really to that game against Miami. That's really where things started to change for him. And from that point forward, the final 6 games of the regular season, or final 6 games of the season, he goes into the ACC tournament as well, scores the ball pretty decent in that. He averaged 16.3 points per game, shot 40% from the field, but just 28% from three. So what it is it's a high volume guy. At least that's what he was at Virginia Tech, especially once he got to that stretch where he started to shoot the ball pretty well and started scoring it. I mean, he had just one game during that 6-game stretch where he didn't shoot it double-digit times. And besides that, I mean, he had 4 different games where he shot the ball at least 15 times, including shooting it 20 times against Syracuse. He did have 26 in that game, scored the ball pretty well for him. And then the double overtime game against Cal, he shot the ball 19 times, made just 5 of those 19 shots. So, I think there's things to like about him. There's no doubt that he is a guy that can catch and shoot and knock down shots. He has a little bit of ability to create on his own, create some separation with his dribble, and knocks down some shots. And he's really good off of ball screens. As the ball screen handler, he certainly is a guy that can thrive in that role. But I don't know if this is a guy that you're bringing in and you're hoping is going to be starting for you this year. Yes, he started for Virginia Tech, but this is a guy that you'd like to have off your bench, someone that can get cooking off the bench for you. And the thing is that it feels like he's been in that role at certain times, but he was seen mostly as a starter for the majority of the year, or at least played starter-like minutes. His role, I think, just kind of fluctuated throughout the year, but once he started getting consistent minutes at the end of the year, that was really where he started to find himself. So the question is which guy is he? Is he the guy that we saw in the first half of the year where even if he would play expansive minutes, he wasn't really scoring at that high of a rate? Or is he the guy that we saw the last 6 games of the year where he's somebody that, he is going to have to put up a decent amount of shots, but he is going to be able to score the ball for you? If you can get him to be more efficient, then I think you've got yourself something that you can work with here, and a guy that can be a contributor for you on the offensive end of the floor. But that's the thing, is that he's got to find a way to be a little more consistent. So I like, for depth, I like it. But in terms of what it means for the roster overall, I don't think this is someone that Tar Heel fans should be pounding their chest over and saying that teams should be fearing us because we brought Jaydon Young to Carolina.
I think it's important to remember you're looking at where he played at, but look at who he went to go play for in Mike Young. When you look at the way Mike Young builds his roster and what he recruits shooters. So he would not have ended up in Blacksburg unless he had the ability and the capability to shoot. I think it's important to remember that the Virginia Tech team that we saw Carolina, dismantle at the end of the year was beat up beyond belief. So he was a big person that we talked about going into that game because of the way he'd played against Miami. And as you mentioned there with the stats to kind of close down the year, had really seemed to individually had turned a corner. Not a lot of talent around him, which made the game harder for him. I think what you're hoping to is you've now got your backup point guard. As opposed to it having to be a freshman, you've now got a guy that can come in and run your offense, that can come off the bench. And I think that's important. I think there's value in having that, but he also has the capability of scoring, and there will be, I don't know, a handful of nights where he might need to put the ball in the basket, and he's capable of doing that. I think what you're hoping for is less volume, more efficiency. Can more be less with him? And I think if it can be, then you're looking at this as a potential great upside addition to the roster. Another thing I think that you have to like about this is he's got 2 years left of eligibility. So this isn't going to be a guy that, you would think could, would only be here for 1 year. You could potentially get 2 years out of him. And I think Carolina has been strategic trying to add guys to the roster that can be here for years to come. Of course, all of that, is up in the air every season because a lot of those guys can re-enter the portal. If he is a breakout star off the bench, will another school offer him money that Carolina just simply isn't willing to pay? That's something that you have to wait and see. And also, he posted a picture on Instagram when he announced his commitment of him saying that he was coming home, and this is where his heart is. This feels like a guy that probably A, grew up wanting to be a Tar Heel, and B, is now getting to live that dream. And I think there's value in that as well, because this might be a guy that understands the expectation that's going to be placed upon him as a basketball player, the team as a whole, but maybe you don't have to fight for him to close out hard on a 3-point shooter or run back and play defense. This feels like a guy that, with as good upside as he could bring, might be a good culture guy too for Hubert Davis, and a guy that can be here for multiple years as well. So, this isn't the best addition Carolina has made this offseason. It's not going to, catch the headlines that, Jaren Stevenson got, Henry Visar, let alone Kyan Evans. But I do think when you've got it, the roster spots able to be filled for Carolina, then this is a guy you're willing to bring in here. You would imagine that you're not paying him a significant amount of money. Obviously you gave him some, but you didn't have to break the bank to get this guy into your program. So I look at this as very low risk, very high reward. And there's nothing wrong with adding a guy like that to your roster every year. And I think Hubert Davis has generally tried to do that. He's tried to add a guy that if he works out, that's nothing but a benefit for Carolina. If he doesn't pan out, it's not going to be a major consequence. And I think that's the thing that Jaydon Young will bring to Carolina, where his ceiling, I think, is much higher than his floor.
Yeah, I think that's right too. I mean, I think his floor is, certainly decent, especially having played in this conference. I think that you're going to get a guy that at the least can fill it up from the outside at certain times. I think he's going to be a guy that, if you need him to be that catch and shoot option off the bench, then he's going to be perfectly fine in that role. But I think there is the upside with him where he could become a guy that at certain points in the season, if you wanted to start him or play him starter-like minutes, you probably could. And he would be able to be successful in those starter-like minutes like we saw towards the end of the year. It's really, again, just about becoming a more efficient player, and hopefully less is more with him. The one thing that, I think people aren't talking enough about with him, or won't be talking enough about with him, is how good of a passer he is. He really is a tremendous passer. It's one of the things, if you watch his highlight tape, it's one of the things that gets pointed out about him. And then when you see some of the actual plays that he's making passing the basketball, you say, why wasn't he a guy that had more assists last year? then you realize, oh, he's on a team that was absolutely terrible a year ago, especially at times on the offensive end of the floor. I mean, you got to think, man, this is a team that lost the game 54-36 this year to Boston College. So this is one of the worst offensive teams in all of the major conference basketball. So, I mean, yeah, I think he's certainly a guy that you have to temper your expectations with. I don't think this is someone that you should be expecting is going to be a game changer, is going to come in and all of a sudden Carolina now is competing to be, one of the top 3 teams in the ACC. I'm competing for an ACC regular season title. But I do think that he's one that has enough upside where it is worth a shot for Carolina. And that's the thing. To me, you say that, there's a big difference. I think there's a smaller difference, honestly, between his floor and his ceiling. And that's not the worst thing in the world, because it means that you're getting a solid player, but at the same time, is he going to develop into a superstar? Is he going to be what you would get if you went out and got an Andre Stoyakovich? Is he going to be what we think Henry Vasar can be in expanded minutes? Probably not. He's probably not going to turn into a key piece of what you do, but he's going to be able to come in off the bench. He's going to provide some better shooting for you from the outside. And I mean, look, if he's playing the point guard spot, if he's playing the 2 guard spot, he's going to provide some decent length. At 6'4", that's a much bigger guard than Carolina had last year. Now, granted, you had a guy like Ian Jackson who was 6'4" as well. But I do think that, this is what that kind of is a little bit of an Ian Jackson type of replacement, or at least that role. Do I think that he has, the upside? Is he going to be a guy that's going to go through a stretch during conference play where he scores 20 a game? I mean, I don't know if he does that, but I do think that he is capable of having stretches like he had towards the end of the season. And that's something that can certainly help Carolina this year.
Yeah, no, there's definitely no doubt about that. And so I think there's value in adding a guy that can come off the bench, run your offense, or even play off the ball while you have a freshman out there. Because I think, what was potentially a nightmare scenario for Hubert Davis in Carolina was that both of your guards coming off the bench were going to be freshmen. And so what happens if you're going to get into a game where both Trimble and Evans maybe pick up 2 early fouls? Like, it's going to happen. You play 40-something times, they're both going to be in foul trouble at the same time. You're putting, freshmen that I like both of them, but these aren't 5 stars coming into your program. They're high level, they're high-end 4 stars. Maybe you're putting them in a position to fail. Well, now you've got a guy that's a rising junior that's played in this conference that can kind of balance that out. And I see value in that. You put him in a better system, a better scheme, better players. I think you'll get better efficiency out of him. And I think that's going to be the name of the game, is just make him a much more efficient scorer. And then that really will bring out the best of him with his ability to pass. If he has guys that can make shots, finish at the rim, maybe that helps Carolina out in a way or two as well. So, I look at this as not a whole lot to lose, a lot more to gain, and we'll have to really wait and see kind of what his role looks like, and the kind of player that he can be in Chapel Hill. Let's get to what a lot of people want to talk about when you saw this commitment come down earlier today, because the initial reaction is well, they're probably out on Andre Stoyakovich. A transfer they have highly pursued really since Van Allen Lubin put his name in the portal earlier this week. I think that pursuit got more intense with Drake Powell's decision to go pro. And from everything that I have seen, that I've read, that I've been told since 12:30, 1 o'clock this afternoon, is that Jaydon Young's not going to stand in the way of Carolina getting Andre Stoyakovich. It's not going to stop their pursuit of trying to land him. Illinois, I still think, is the team in the school that's perceived to be the front runner, perceived to be the favorite to land him. We'll reiterate, though, he was in Champaign on Wednesday with an official visit, and has not committed. And I believe Stoyakovich did have a conversation with Inside Carolina, and he made it known that Carolina has been very aggressive in terms of coming after him, with constant conversation with both himself and then, of course, his agent. We know what this is going to come down to. It's going to come down to money. And you and I both said when we talked on Wednesday that, as much as we like Vin Allen Lupin, as much as we would like Vin Allen Lupin back, if you can add Andrei Stoyakovich to your roster, you add him to your roster. And whatever happens with Vin Allen Lupin, that happens with them. So I think you got to be, I guess, still encouraged that we're sitting here on Friday and Stoyakovich, A, hasn't committed to Illinois, and has, B, made it known that Carolina has put together an impressive sales pitch because, I think, we were all the opinion that when he went there and visited on Wednesday, he'd be a member of the Fighting Illini by the end of the night. But it appears, and you got to give credit to first Hubert Davis and then Jim Tanner, that Carolina has given him something seriously, something to consider about. And it feels like this commitment, it's going to come down to the wire with Carolina right there firmly in the running.
Yeah, I think Carolina certainly still has a shot here. And yeah, I think you're right. This is not going to eliminate the possibility that Stoyakovich comes here. I think you do wonder, was this part of a pivot plan for Stoyakovich? Because I've seen some people have told me today that, honestly, they think that this decision is going to come down at some point, either later today or tomorrow, and that he probably is still leaning towards Illinois. If that is actually true, then I mean, this is part of probably a backup plan, would be to get a guy that has a little bit of size at the guard position and potentially run 3 guards again next year. I would hope that's not the case, because I think that Carolina showed you this past year that when you are out there with 3 forwards and 2 guards, that's when they have been most successful. That's when the offense is most efficient. That's when they're doing things on the defensive end of the floor that they need to be doing. So I think that's the game plan again this year, or should be the game plan again this year. It's just whether or not you actually can get Stoyakovich. And I mean, if you can get him in here, you're talking about a guy that, to me, would be a lock for all ACC. I don't know which team he would be on. I would say probably a lock for second team, because he's only going to continue to improve, I would think, based off of what we saw this past year. Even if he doesn't score the ball at nearly the rate that he did, I think he might be a more efficient player, might shoot the ball better from 3, and that could allow him to be, a second team, maybe even first team all ACC member at the end of the season. That's what Carolina really needs, I think, at the wing spot. You get him, you're talking about a roster that is good enough to challenge for ACC regular season championship status. I think that's the type of player that you would be bringing into the program. You don't get him. I still think you have to get somebody on the wing. If you still have that money, I think it's important to go out and get somebody there. I know a lot of people have been against it because they don't like the player that he is or the personality that he is. I think Chad Baker-Mazara would be a guy you'd have to take a serious look at, because that's one of the few guys that is in the portal that can play that wing spot that is not currently in the NBA draft. Everybody's asking about RJ Lewis. We had people asking the other day about Jameer Watkins. Those are guys that are in the draft. If they are to pull out, then Carolina should get involved with those guys immediately if they don't get Stoyakovich. But that's the thing. Stoyakovich is the easy thing to do, man. That's the guy that's out there now. That's the guy that you want. I was told that one of the reasons why he's probably not going to take a visit to Chapel Hill is because he is familiar with Hubert Davis and the staff. He's familiar with Chapel Hill from last year when Carolina tried to recruit him out of Stanford. So he will probably just choose not to visit campus again because he knows everything that he needs to know, and he'll go ahead and make his decision. So if I had to say where my confidence level is at that Carolina ends up landing him, I would say it's probably like a 3 out of 10. I do think that right now Illinois is probably still the favorite, but I don't think it's impossible that Carolina actually ends up landing him. And Jaydon Young certainly is not going to stand in the way of Carolina landing a guy that's 6'7" and plays the wing.
one thing we got to mention with us believing that Carolina should value Stoyakovich over the potential return of Van Allen Lubin is Van Allen Lubin's status is directly tied to that house settlement case. That settlement got delayed by a federal judge earlier this week because of roster limits, and so that decision that we've been expecting to come down literally since the tournament basically got to the Final Four, just got delayed again, which may force Carolina's hand. And so I think what they've got to ask themselves internally, because I was told that Carolina, if they had maybe $1 million and a half more to offer Stoyakovich, it could really turn the tide and get him in Chapel Hill. I think what Hubert Davis and Jim Tanner got to discuss internally is, are you basically willing to pool all the money that you have for Van Allen Lubin and just throw it into Andrei Stoyakovich, and then go from there. And I think it might be a harsh reality, but when we live in a day and time when this stuff when college sports are like pro sports, where it's a business and it's transactional. Now, Carolina's got to make the best business decision for them for next season. Who financially do you benefit more from on the basketball court? Andrei Stoyakovich or Van Allen Lubin? I like Van Allen Lubin. I like him a lot. You put a 6'7" guard on this roster, I'm with you, man. I think you're talking about a guy. You're talking about a roster that is set up to compete to win the ACC. That could be a top, let's say, at worst, a top 3 seed on the seed line come Selection Sunday, and a team that you're confident that A, can win at least one game in the tournament, and B, advance at least into the second weekend. And so if the settlement thing is what they were banking on to get Van Allen Lubin back, and that just got delayed, man, we don't know how long that thing can continue to be delayed. You gotta have an honest conversation with yourself. So I think it'll be interesting to see, because I do think that if Stoyakovich does come to UNC, there's not a pathway, even if the settlement gets passed. I don't see a situation where Van Allen Lubin comes back.
Yep.
And as much as I'm okay with that, as much as you're okay with that, Hubert Davis and that staff has to become okay with that. And if they are, then I could see Carolina saying, okay, we got to do what we got to do. Thank you, Van Allen Lubin. You can go find your next home, because Hubert Davis has to put together a roster that can win at the level that this program is expected to win at. And so we talked about the Lubin portal entry, semi-holding the program hostage. You got to give Carolina credit because they moved forward. They got in on a transfer that makes a lot of sense. That decision by that judge to delay that settlement case, I think, just further pushes their hand to where Stoyakovich needs to be the main priority over Van Allen Lubin. And if you miss out on Stoyakovich, then you've got that money there. You're committed to Van Allen Lubin, and he'll be back next season. But you need to be willing to make sure you land that talent over a guy that played for you last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just important because of how the roster's built. If you don't end up landing Stoyakovich, who are you playing at that 3 spot? Are you going small? Are you playing Seth Trimble there again? Are you potentially going with Jonathan Powell, a guy that has the size at 6'6", but we said it when we were talking about him. Ideally, you'd like for him to come off the bench because he's a guy that's a catch-and-shoot 3-point shot, and that's pretty much it. Outside of that, there's not much else that he brings to the table. He's got some starting experience, but ideally you want him to be the guy that's coming off the bench and really giving you that guy that can heat up from beyond the arc. Same thing with Jaydon Young, who would then be forced into the lineup more than likely if Seth Trimble ends up moving out there. Or do you play Caleb Wilson there? We've talked about that scenario. I do think that he's got elements to his game that fit the 3 spot where he would be able to score out of that spot. I think also he's a good enough defender to be able to defend that spot and defend it at a very high level. I think ideally you would want for him to be the 4 man on this team. that's the position that you want to play him at. But if it's not an ideal situation, then that's what you're going to have to do. That's why you have to value a guy that plays the 3 spot right now and fits it to a T over a guy that plays, that's more than likely going to be your backup at the 4 and the 5 spot. And I get it. That's important too, the fact that he is able to back up 2 different spots. But you did get Jaron Stevenson, who has the size to play either spot. You do still have James Brown on the roster, as we said, and as we expected, he is going to come back. So that's another guy that has good size on the inside, good enough size on the inside, and is a fighter that we believe is going to be able to play. And then you have the magic question of what is Jaydon High doing? Is he coming back? Is he, still going to be a part of this roster? Because if he is, then you've got a guy that can back up the 4 spot. Then you've got a guy that can back up the 5 spot. That, again, it's not perfect. He's not exactly what Vin Allen Lubin is, where he's a guy that can get offensive rebounds, go back up, and finish at the rate that Vin Allen Lubin does. But he has the size, he has the mentality to be able to play that type of position and play it well enough for Carolina. So I think that's the route that Carolina should probably take. They should be pushing hard for Stoyakovich right now until that is out of the way. And then, yeah, like I said, if it's not him, then you've still got Baker Mazara that you can go after, or wait on one of the 2 guys, RJ Lewis or Jameer Watkins, in the NBA draft and see what their ultimate decision is. That's the thing about where Carolina is right now. I do think they're in a good enough spot where if they choose to wait that out and see what ultimately happens with those guys, they're still in a position where they are putting out a competitive enough roster.
All right, let's move on to the other topic we have to discuss today. And it really revolves around the roster that Carolina has built. One that I think we believe in a lot more than 2 people that we're going to talk about. Some criticism has come Carolina's way for the job they've done or lack thereof so far in the transfer portal. Aaron Torres, he tweeted this out earlier this week after Drake Powell declared for the draft. He quoted a Jonathan Gavoni tweet, and it read as, quote, UNC went out this offseason, hired a GM, raised a bunch of money, and ended up with arguably a worse roster than they had a year ago. Hubert Davis is so cooked, man. Torres is a host for Fox Sports, and covers college football, college basketball for them on the national side. Then I saw this floating around on social media as well. Rob Doster, who does, a fantastic job covering the sport, has built just a machine over there at the Field of 68. He was talking with Jeff Goodman, and he was talking about how he's not the biggest fan of what Carolina has done so far this offseason. Take a listen.
Have as big of a budget as anybody does. And these are the point guards that were available in this year's transfer cycle. Donovan Dent, PJ Haggerty, Robert Wright, Bennett Sturts, Jacoby Gillespie, Boogie Fland, Adrian Woolley, Silas Demery, Xavier Lee, and Didon Thomas, right? I think all of those guys were better than who they ended up with in Kyan Evans. And that's not – I think Kyan Evans has a chance to be a solid player. He was a sophomore last year at Colorado State. He took a big step forward, shoots 44% from 3 on volume, has a good assist-to-turnover ratio. But he's a guy that averaged 10 points a game, was a complimentary piece at Colorado State in the Mountain West, and now you're asking him to take the step up to North Carolina to be the guy? I think that you had two holes that you had to fill for Carolina. You had to get a point guard, and you had to get a 5, and they got the 5, and they did not get a point guard, and there were plenty of point guards available in like that you could have gone out and got. And they could still go get Boogie Fland in theory, but that's where I'm at with North Carolina.
First off, I think calling Kyan Evans a complimentary piece with the way he played the last 14 games of the season is a little disrespectful. You're talking about a guard that was a buzzer beater away from playing in the second weekend of the tournament, him being a big reason why. With that being said, though, I value Rob Doster's opinion, or else we would not have played the audio that we just played. And we referenced the tweet there from Aaron Torres. When you read that tweet, hear that tweet, and then hear the audio that we just played right there, do you think they, either one of them, have a point? Do you think both are wrong? One is right, one is wrong. What do you make of it? Because I mean, maybe I'm looking at this through Carolina blue lenses. I know you're losing your second all-time leading scorer, but I think Carolina's backcourt in totality is going to be better next year than it was this past season. You've gotten bigger, you've gotten stronger up front. I think you're going to be better up front as well. So I don't think this roster has clearly gotten worse. And y'all know how I feel about Kai and Evans. So what do you make of those two guys voicing their concerns and their criticisms of the job Hubert Davis has done this offseason?
Well, I think one's right and one's wrong. I think Aaron Torres is a complete moron who should not be talking about college basketball. I think he is a Kentucky fan that we have come to know over the past few years. And I think he just loves taking shots at Carolina, because if you think that this roster is worse than this past year's, I just don't know how to help you. I mean, this roster has a big man. They've got a point guard that's going to be able to score it at a pretty decent level, I think, in Kai and Evans. We'll get to that a little bit more here in a second. You've got Seth Trimble, who you would expect to take another step forward this year. And then you've got Caleb Wilson, who I think is going to have a much bigger impact than either of the two freshmen that were on your roster this past year. And that's really saying something, because I thought Drake Powell, as the year went along, became a very impactful freshman. Yes, I get the concern at that 3 spot. We talked about it. That's an area that Carolina's got to be able to fill. But if they were to go with a 3-guard lineup, or if they were to go with Caleb Wilson at the 3, I still think that roster is better than what you were putting out there last year. You have much more size. You have much more balanced scoring. I think you're going to have, a much better rebounding team than you were a year ago, more consistent. And I think, you would look at this group. I think the one area you question them is probably defensively. But as I mentioned, Caleb Wilson is a really good defender. Jaren Stevenson, a much better defender than I think a lot of people are going to give him credit for, looking at his stats and focusing on what he did on the offensive end of the floor. And then Vasar, good rim protector for Carolina as well. So I do think that there are some really good defensive elements here as well. So his opinion to me means nothing. That's not shocking. I think most of his opinions on college football are terrible as well. Rob Doster, I think he brings up a good point that it is not the highest level of point guard that they could have gone out and gotten. But I do think that there are some circumstances that you have to take into account. I think one, he starts out with Donovan Dent. Donovan Dent was never going anywhere but UCLA. The fact that he didn't enter with a do not contact tag was shocking, considering how quickly he committed to UCLA and basically how everybody said that the minute that he entered, that was where he was going. And then he did have a couple of point guards in there. Boogie Fland was one of them. I forget who the other one was that wasn't in the portal at the time when Carolina landed Kai and Evans. And here's the thing. You could say that Carolina should have known those guys would enter the transfer portal, talk through these back channels, and make sure you prepare for that. Okay, well, if you do that and you're still without a point guard, then Kai and Evans ends up going somewhere else. And when Carolina doesn't land that bigger fish, or that bigger fish in the case of Boogie Fland actually ends up staying in the NBA draft, then what do? Then you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, why the hell didn't we go after Kai and Evans? Because we could have had a really solid guy that has a lot of upside at this point guard position that could have been our point guard, but we were worried about whether or not the grass was greener on the other side. Carolina learned that you can't take that approach by the way that they did last year at the center position. They tried taking that approach of saying, we're waiting for that big name. We're waiting for, the name that I always heard that Carolina was potentially waiting on. They were interested in certain guys. I mean, they were definitely interested in a guy like Clifford Amori, but the other name they were interested in was Ryan Kalkbrenner from Creighton. And that was a guy that was rumored he was going to be entering the portal. Guess what happened? Never enters. And so I don't hate the strategy that Carolina took. Some of the other guys on that list, like a Xavier Lee, I mean, you're talking about competing with the national champions. And you could say, well, Carolina's brand is supposed to be bigger than Florida's. They're supposed to have the money. Man, Florida's making a ton of money in the SEC. They're coming off a national title, and that's a program that I think has more pedigree and more of an appetite for basketball than people probably realize. So I'm okay with where Carolina's at. I think it's probably as good of a spot as you could have hoped for them to be at. But I do understand what Doster is saying in the fact that you would think that with Carolina's brand, they would be able to pull in one of the best guys. But I think that's just how the market sort of fell.
Yeah, I think when we're sitting here talking about this team this time next year, we'll be talking about Kai Evans as one of the best guards in the country. That's my personal opinion. I think he is going to be a superstar. I think he's going to be a first, second team all ACC guy. I think he's going to average 15, 16 points per game, and he's going to do it while shooting the ball very efficiently. Donovan Dent, while individually credit him for making a $3.5 million, effectively screwed the market because that's what he was the first major guard of consequence into the portal, and that's what he got paid. Carolina was not in a position to pay one guy that much money. Not with you wanting to bring back Seth Trimble. Not with you wanting to bring back or potentially bring back Drake Powell, Van Allen Lubin. You have a 5-star top 10 prospect coming into your class. If they would have paid one guard that type of money, you probably don't have Visar and Stevenson. So you don't have as much depth you have in the front court. And I think that's the thing that Carolina is not getting credit for. Did they get the best point guard in the country? No, they did not. Did they get one of the best point guards in the country? I think he's going to be that. And I think when you're talking about, I think he'll be talking about it, like we're talking about him next year as a guy that we got to go back to the negotiating table with to make sure he doesn't want to go portaling and go somewhere else because I think he's going to have that type of season. And so I think what Doster's comments were, I think they were just unfair more than anything because I don't think he was giving credit to how good of a player Carolina got. And then some of these situations and circumstances, if Carolina would have gotten involved in, they don't have the 5 guys they have right now. And so you don't have the depth in your portal class that you had. And let's be frank, man, Carolina lost 5 guys to the portal and 1 guy to the NBA draft. Mm-hmm. Like 6 guys have gone, are off this roster in addition to the graduation of RJ Davis. So Carolina needed to bring in a big portal haul because you're bringing in 3 freshmen, which is for basketball a pretty good sized class in this day and time when you rebuild your roster every single season. So I do think that they're in a better position to be much more competitive than they were a year ago because I don't think the roster is as poorly constructed as it was last season. And I'd love to know how different that tune changes if Andre Stoyakovich ends up in Chapel Hill. Like if that guy is donning the Carolina blue and now you've paired him with a big like Henry Vesar, who I think is poised to be a difference maker for Carolina, a Kai Evans, who's an analytical nerd's dream, very efficient scorer, has some toughness, has some grit. Like I wonder just how different Rob Doster's comments would be. And so hopefully maybe Carolina can land him and he can maybe have a chance to readdress those comments because for all the concerns around Hubert Davis, for all the concerns around, how is this going to work with Carolina installing a basketball front office, I find it hard to be upset with the job they've done in the portal. Like they said, this is what we want to do. And for the most part, they went out there and they've executed it. Now it's going to be on Hubert Davis and his staff's job to put the pieces to the puzzle in the right places to get the most out of these guys. And if that happens, I think you'll be talking about a team that's, suited to win, 20 plus games in the regular season, finish top 4 in the ACC and be firmly in the tournament come Selection Sunday.
Yeah, I think that's certainly where you would expect this roster is at right now. And I think the point that you brought up, that is 100% true. is that if Carolina ends up landing one of these bigger names, then there is no way that they are able to build the roster the rest of the way that they are. I mean, the thing is, you land one of these point guards, who's to say that Henry Vasar is here? Especially, I mean, you're talking about one of the names that he threw out there is PJ Haggerty. And the thing about Haggerty is, first of all, he has transferred every year that he has been at the college level. So he's a very transient type of player. He's a guy that really is coming to whatever school he's going to go to score the ball at a high level. It's basically give him the ball and get out of the way. And I don't think that's what Carolina wants. I think they want more balance to their offense. They want a guy that's going to be able to share the ball at a really high level. And Haggerty is a guy that, shared the ball at a pretty decent level for a guy that took the mindset towards it that he did. But I still don't know how great of a fit that is. Boogie Fland is a guy that I would definitely have liked. There's no doubt about that. I think he'd be a nice fit here at Carolina. But again, that was a guy that wasn't in the portal when you ended up landing this commitment. So I think the balance of the roster is incredibly important for a team that's looking to rebound and get solidly into the tournament. So I'm not hurt that Carolina didn't go after some of these other names. There are a couple other names in there. Woodley, who of course transferred to Louisville. That was another guy. Entered the transfer portal, knew immediately where he was wanting to go. He may have even entered with a do not contact. So, I mean, that shows you right there. There were guys that were just motivated to go to certain schools. I think Carolina is still in a very competitive spot. To me, they're probably third or fourth right now in the conference. If you look at it from a preseason perspective, the only reason that you would probably have them in fourth would be if you still consider that Clemson is a team that's going to be up there. With the losses that they suffered, though, I think even that's a little bit of a question, despite how good of a job Brad Brownell has been doing there the last few years. Duke and Louisville is who everybody is chasing. And I think that there are some other teams that are starting to do much better in the portal. That team is NC State over the last couple of days. They got Terrence Arsenault, the transfer from Houston, and they got Jerry Dang, the transfer from Florida State earlier today. Both of those guys, that's significant. So Carolina, I think, they have to keep looking. I think they need to still add a guy at that 3 spot. But yeah, I think this roster is in a good enough spot to feel like they will be able to safely make the tournament field this year. And they will be able to compete for one of those top 3 spots in the ACC, which, based off of what we're coming off of this year and really coming off of 3 of the 4 years that Hubert Davis has been there, if you can tell me that Carolina is off the bubble and is solidly in the field as we get towards the end of the regular season and is battling for one of those top 3 spots, I'm going to take that with where this program is currently at.
Yeah, our guy Greg Ward comments, you get Andre and this team can be elite, and this roster is more balanced top to bottom from last year and should be deeper. Could not agree more. And I think that's what Carolina was wanting to do. They wanted to get bigger. They wanted to get stronger. They wanted to add shooting. And I think Hubert Davis, with seeing how lack of depth hurt him in so many games this past year, wanted to really add depth to his roster. And I think, we'll look at it, and I've said it all 4 off seasons, and this will be the 5th. I'll look at it and say there's depth here. But I think when we get into December, I'll be talking about there actually being depth here. And that'll be a difference maker, because when Carolina had, good depth 2 years ago, look at what that team was able to do. 3 of the 4 years, this team was not very deep, and they struggled to handle that. So I think this roster is poised to put the program back in a better position, top to bottom, to compete the way we expect to compete at on an annual basis here with Carolina. That's going to wrap up this edition of the podcast, guys. In the meantime, we encourage you to visit the website, HeelToughBlog.com. The Jaydon Young commitment can be found for you guys right there. Broke that down for you earlier this afternoon. Of course, we're basically on Andre Stoyakovich watch. If he ends up in Chapel Hill, we'll have you covered with that. So be on the lookout for that, just in case he ends up being a Tar Heel. More transfers for Bill Belichick and Carolina football. Anthony has you covered on that front as well. So make sure you get to our website. That's HeelToughBlog.com every single morning, afternoon, and evening for the latest and the best coverage of Carolina basketball. Follow us on Twitter at HeelToughBlog. Turn on those notifications. That way, every time we post an article, it'll send a notification to you. That way you're staying up to date is as easy as possible. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys, rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball off season. With that, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. So Anthony, once again, for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.